Hello and welcome to another video. I have a lot of things that I would like to talk about and a lot of things that I've already talked about because I recorded quite a chunk of this video previously and then my audio crashed. So I'm doing this again. But before I get into the books that I would like to talk about, what am I wearing? So this is a sweater that I knit last year. I used a pattern from the 1940s from the UK, from Vogue Knitting. I had initially not made this for myself, which is why it doesn't completely fit me, but it was on my website for quite some time and no one was really interested in it, so I thought, okay, I'll just keep it for myself. And I'm very happy that I did because I do really like it. I'm also wearing this 1930s skirt that I've worn before. I like to wear this combination because this is the same yarn that is used for the bordeaux stripes in this sweater, so it matches well. Okay, so let's actually get into the books. I don't have any updates with regards to representations of the intellectual. It's been a couple of days since I filmed the last video, and in between that time I've actually been learning how to restore old knitting machines, and so that has been very tech heavy, and so I didn't have the bandwidth to dive deep into another of his essays. So hopefully I'll be able to do that in the future. What is quite interesting though is that a couple of days ago I was on my TikTok and I was just inundated with posts about anti-intellectualism on booktok. I didn't really dive deep into it, but from what I understand, there was someone who spoke about the rise of anti-intellectualism on booktok. I believe they were talking about there being books that are objectively bad in the sense that there are many grammar mistakes and spelling mistakes, and there are people on booktok who are promoting it as the best books of all time, or just, how would you say this in English, a literair hoogstandje, just the pinnacle of literary accomplishment. I think that might be a bit too much, but they are getting praised, and there have been a lot of arguments about all of that. I don't know, I didn't look too much into it, but maybe I can do that in the future. I do think that there might be some things that would be interesting to discuss. I don't know. Let me know if that sounds interesting. In any case, I would actually first like to discuss this book that I finished last week. I wanted to talk about it in the last episode, but I didn't have enough time. And I'm actually glad that I didn't discuss it because I did do some research the last 2 days or so. I read a couple of articles about the subject matter in this book, and it has given me an even larger appreciation for this book. But yes, this is Hello Baby by Kim Young, and this is the Dutch translation. It was translated from the Korean to the Dutch by Motto Mandersloot and Francisca van Vark. The English translation is set to come out on the 28th of July. It will be published by Hogarth, I believe. And that translation was done by Sorakim Russell. But yes, Hello Baby. What is this book about? It centers around 6 women in South Korea. They're in their 30s and 40s, and they all go to this one fertility clinic in Seoul called Angel Baby. And they have created this group chat where they talk about all of their struggles, all of their woes with going through the fertility journey, IVF, all of those things. And after 2 years, one of the women, her name is Kim Jung-hyo, she, during one of the meetings that they have in real life, announces that she is going to quit all of the fertility treatments. At the time, she's 44, and she has been doing these treatments for 15 years at this point. She started when she was 29, and there have been miscarriages, all types of things that have failed, and she's just going to give up. But she remains in the group chat. She doesn't really say anything. And so after a year of essentially her disappearing, she pops up in the group chat again. And essentially what she says is, "Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Oh, by the way, I have a kid now." And it's Lunar New Year, so how about all of you drop by and meet the new baby? And so once this bomb gets dropped in the group chat, everyone is surprised, people are happy, people are envious, but there's also this cloud of suspicion, because how is it that Jang-hyo is the first person in this group to give birth to a child while she hasn't even done any fertility treatments for over a year? And so that is kind of the key point of the novel, the thing that really drives the plot. That moment where Jang-hyo reveals that she has a child, that bombshell essentially is used as an anchor point to explore the lives of all of these 6 women. And that's basically the novel. That's what it's all about. And I think the first thing that I would like to say about this book is, for one, I really enjoyed it. I was surprised that I actually became a bit emotional at the end, which is a good thing because I love to be surprised by books. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book was the structure. So, like I said, you have this anchor point, this moment where Jung-hyo says, "I have just given birth." And this point essentially sits in the middle of the book. You have part 1 and you have part 2. And in part 1, you have 4 chapters, and each of those chapters is about one of these women in the group chat. And so every chapter covers, for the most part, their entire life. So how they grew up, their parents, etc., etc. And then it zooms in on that point in their life where they want to start having children and realize that they need to go to a fertility clinic. And so you also get to learn about how the group came about, so to speak. So each of those stories gets told up until the moment where that message gets dropped in the group chat. And then the second part, it features the story of Jung-hyo and the other woman from the group chat. And then also another woman, and this is actually Jung-hyo's neighbor who didn't go through fertility treatments, but is a mother of a set of twins and then a younger child. And so that story is also used as a way to kind of give examples of the struggles that one might go through within Korean society as a woman who is having a child. So yes, in that second part, you have those 3 women, and from their perspective, the story continues. So after the message is dropped and the women start coming together. Okay, so there are a lot of interesting things about this novel. I think if I would have to just give a quick summary of why I thought this was a good story is, for one, the structure. 2, the characters were really great. They felt very, very real to me. And I think the last one was just a clever way of exploring all these different issues within South Korean society, because it was really interesting to, after the book, read the articles that touched upon all of these topics and go like, oh wait, I recognize that from the book, I recognize this from the book, and things, I don't know, for me it gave me a better understanding as to the importance of this book in South Korea and why it became so popular that it's getting translated in all these different languages. But yeah, where do I even begin? So maybe I should start with the articles actually, because I wrote down a couple of things that I thought were quite interesting. Okay, so first up, South Korea is actually facing a huge problem, and I don't know what the English word for it is, but the Dutch word is vergrijzing. Essentially, their birth rate is plummeting, and I believe that they have the lowest birth rate in the entire world. I think it's around 0.6 children per woman at this point. And if I remember correctly, in 2020, the death rate actually exceeded the birth rate as well. But yeah, this is an issue that they're struggling with a lot. And this is actually quite baffling because back in the 60s, a woman in South Korea, on average, would have 6 children, and the government actually took measures to decrease the amount of children that people were having. And they invested in different types of programs to educate people in things such as family planning and voorbehoedsmiddelen. There's an English word for that. And they had campaigns promoting people to have max 2 children. And what happened was quite similar to what happened in China, where there was a preference for male children. And so now South Korea is also dealing with this disparity between genders, where for every 100 women, there are 115 men. Yes, so there's this issue now with the plummeting birth rate, but at the same time, there is also an increased demand for fertility treatments in South Korea. Between 2018 and 2022, there was a 50 or nearly 50% increase of fertility treatments. And in 2024, actually, 1 in 6 children that were born in South Korea were conceived with the help of fertility treatments. So initially that might seem kind of strange, right? You have this plummeting birth rate, but at the same time you have this increased demand of fertility treatments. And if you look into it not even that deeply, it's actually quite clear to see what is happening. Simply put, in South Korea, as a woman, there are a ton of disadvantages that come with having a child, especially at a young age. And the interesting thing is that a lot of these disadvantages, when I was reading about them in the articles, I could easily point out in the novel how they kind of came up. But for one, you have affordability. It is incredibly expensive to have a child in South Korea. Education is so incredibly expensive. This affordability ties into so many things. It's I'm gonna apologize beforehand because I don't think I'm going to do the best job at explaining everything clearly. But from what I understand is that South Korea is an incredibly patriarchal society. I've known this for quite some time because at some point in a very, very far past, I used to listen to a lot of K-pop, and if you kind of learn about South Korean culture through that, you'll know how feminism is viewed in South Korea. I believe the last president who got impeached, he was very anti-feminist and actually did a lot to try and dismantle all of the projects and institutions that were there to actually gets South Korea to a place where there would be more gender equality. I watched this one video about, I think, one of the spokespersons from those from that party, and essentially what that guy was doing was he was comparing radical feminism to fascism in Europe, which tells you already a lot about how feminism is viewed in South Korea. But yes, so there are a lot of consequences that come from that. For one, if a woman wants to have a child, they often have to sacrifice their career, because working women are often penalized within the work environment, and there's actually quite a bit of discrimination against them, not only from men but also from women. There are things in place such as leave in order to do IVF treatment, for instance, but a lot of people are scared to actually take that leave because of the consequences that might bring. And it's in the book as well. There are women in the group chat who have careers and they're scared to talk about getting pregnant, being pregnant, going through IVF, and it's because they have seen how other people have been treated who did go on leave or who were pregnant, and the consequences that they faced, the how would I say it, the shaming that they received. It's absolutely horrific. So there's that aspect of having a child is going to impact your career. Also, the neighbor of Jung-hyo, she actually had a career before she got pregnant, and she went on maternity leave for the twins, and then she became pregnant again, and she was just feeling so much pressure that eventually she quit her job and gave up her career. Also, there's this one thing that I saw in one of these articles as well, is that after about 10 or 11 years after having given birth, you can see this influx of women coming back into the workforce. However, this extended leave has impacted the amount of money that they can make. So basically, the image that I'm trying to sketch here is that not only is having a child expensive just due to education and all of the other expenses that go into raising a child will also impact someone's earning capabilities. And on top of that, you have these patriarchal norms where it says that child rearing is the woman's task, and so you have this disproportionate amount of work that one has to do whilst trying to cope with having a job where there's also within Korean society way less work and life balance than, for instance, here in the West. And because there is no balance, no safety net, no reassurance, one often has to choose to quit. And so this is what a lot of South Korean women are facing. They have to choose either between a career or a child. And often what happens is they choose the career because that offers stability. But then when they finally have that stability and finally feel comfortable enough to have children, they're older. And so what happens is that they need fertility treatments to conceive these children. And that is kind of the issue that South Korea is facing at the moment. It's this thing where you have the government who really wants to increase the birth rate, but however isn't willing to increase the rights of women in order to do so. And so here we are with a plummeting birth rate. And yeah, where's this book? Yeah, so this book gives such a clear insight on these issues. You have these women as well also saying, oh, I wish that I would have started having kids earlier, but earlier I didn't feel like I had found my footing within society, so I decided not to have children. And there are also a ton of other things that this book does well, just to illustrate the pain, the struggle that it is going through IVF, the continued hope and then loss. It sounds like an absolute nightmare, and I commend anyone who goes through all these treatments because it is not easy. Another thing that I liked as well were the different types of partners, men, that were in this book. For instance, you have the quote-unquote ringleader of the group, Kalmun-jung. At the start of the novel, she quite clearly points out the difference between the experience of the birthing person going through IV treatment and the person supplying the sperm. She says that for people like her, the journey is characterized with a lot of pain and injections, and for people like her husband, it's all about pleasure. Basically, you just have to provide your sperm and that's it. Well, it's not always the case like that, but there's definitely a discrepancy between the two parties. What makes it worse for Moonjung is that her husband isn't the most supportive. For instance, he's not always there with the treatments, and there's another husband who doesn't really understand or tries to understand what it's like for his wife to go through this roller coaster of fertility treatments. And on top of that, you also have the societal pressures. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot to mention that. Just the pressure that all these women are dealing with, that is coming from their parents-in-law, the constant question of, oh, when are you finally going to give me a grandchild? When are you finally going to get pregnant? And how quite easily the blame of infertility is placed on women. And one thing I liked is that you had one husband, and I think it was Han Ji-eun's husband, who is a taekwondo trainer, so incredibly masculine. Ji-eun is dealing with PCOS, so polycystic ovary syndrome. Did I get that right? Yes, I got that right. So this is a hormonal disorder that can make it quite hard for a person to conceive. And in this one scene, Ji-eun and her husband are talking to her father-in-law, so her husband's father, and he is starting to pester Ji-eun, like, when are you gonna finally have a kid? And that's the moment where her husband says, well, you know, I am actually the problem. I'm shooting blanks. And that's the moment where the father, he turns red and embarrassed and he just leaves. And I like that a lot because often you'll see that when you have these fertility issues, there's not even a thought that, hey, perhaps there might also be some issues with the man. And in the novel, you'll see that there's one husband who is afraid to acknowledge to other people that his sperm isn't of a very high quality, which is making it harder for him and his wife to conceive. And so because of that shame, he just kind of lets his wife just take the brunt of all of the questions and blame as to why they don't have children. You also have another woman who actually breaks up with the guy that she has been in a relationship with for a very long time, and you can just see the disappointment of her parents that she's basically quote unquote squandered her chance at having a child. And this was actually the moment that I learned that in South Korea, as an unmarried woman, you're actually not allowed to get a sperm donor and go through IVF on your own, which is kind of wild. And so you see this character contemplating perhaps going outside of South Korea in order to become pregnant. But yes, I think that is everything that I have to say with regards to this book. I bet there's more things that I could talk about, but I think that's all I got for now. Apologies if I didn't really think that I did a good job of explaining the book, but I would recommend this. If you are thinking of reading this, I would say give it a go. So that's a book that I finished last week. I'm currently reading a Swedish classic. I also got this from my library. It is Kallocain by Karin Boye. And I looked up the Swedish title. It's kallocain. And in English, there's an English translation of this book as well. It's kallocain. The Dutch translation was done by Bart Kramer. And I'm about halfway through the book. This time around, I don't know if I mentioned this in this recording, but the way that I take notes, kind of learning now at the moment how to take notes with a library book, because generally what I like to do with my own books, the books that I own, I will just write in it and do whatever basically. So I will write in it, and then afterwards I will come back and then go through all of the notes that I've made, and then I'll write down all of my thoughts. But obviously I can't really do that with a library book. So with Hello Baby, actually I have these dot bookmarkers that I use. I also use them for just my own books, and because they're reusable, so I don't need to use those post-it notes. And that's basically what I did. I just used these dots, and then I came back later to read the passage. But I don't think that that's very efficient, or, well, it wasn't the best thing to do because I didn't write down anything that I thought about. So I just read through the passages and tried to remember why I thought that a certain passage was important to remember. With kallocain, what I did was I just tried to read as far as I could before I felt that I was going to forget the thoughts that I had, and then I would just write it down in my notebook what I thought. But yeah, this one doesn't have any bookmarks, because how would I ascribe? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to take notes whilst I'm reading. I don't know, I just really love taking notes when reading. I feel like I get more enjoyment out of it, and especially at the start when things are a bit vague, it helps me a lot to kind of ground myself within the story. But yes, kallocain, this was a book that was recommended to me by someone on TikTok. Okay, I have to make a quick detour because I think I might forget about this. So I had found this book online, Engagement by Gun-Britt Sundström. Yes, Engagement is the English title. Husband is the Swedish one, Maken. Then Dutch, the translation is de wederhelft, so the other half. And it's about two students who meet each other in Stockholm, and quite early on they get into a relationship. The guy's name is Gustav and the girl's name is Martina. And Gustav, he wants to, be in a relationship for a couple of years, get engaged, get married, have kids, just go through the traditional trajectory of life at that time. And Martina seems to be quite opposed to that. She is afraid that if she does give in to this type of lifestyle, that her life will be very boring and mundane, and she'll end up regretting it. She does still love Gustav though, so it's not like there are issues in terms of them not liking each other. It's just this specific point in terms of what they want for their future. It's a bit of a point of contention. One of the quotes that's in this book that I think Penguin also put in the synopsis was something in the vein of, I want to have him, I really do, I just don't want him to have me. But from what I understood doing some research into this book, it has been kind of promoted as a feminist book. And I actually found an article published in The Guardian. I think I had written this down for the last video that I made. So yeah, there was an article in The Guardian. Guardian. There was an article in The Guardian by Emma Brooks. She did an interview with Sundström last year talking about the resurgence of the book now that it has received a Dutch translation, an English one, and I'm sure that it has received a number of different other translations. And I'm pretty sure that I read through the entire article, and it seems that Sundström has some difficulties with this book, or I don't know, I think how it is being received or how it has been received. There's something about the reception that has made her a bit uncomfortable. She herself said in the interview that this isn't a feminist novel, because in a feminist novel, the end, and I'm kind of spoiling this now, but in the end, the woman ends up alone, divorced and happy, something like that. And I I thought that was so short-sighted. When I think about feminism, I see it more as a political movement that strives towards gender equality. But I can also understand that there are different factions within feminism. You have also many radical feminists. For instance, within South Korea, what I learned was this 4Bs movement, where the 4Bs stand for, I believe, no men, no dating, no sex, and no children. I'm not too sure about the fourth one. I mean, basically what I'm trying to say is that there are different types of feminism, and I think it's very, I hate to use the word reductive again, but it's quite reductive to say, okay, every feminist book ends with the woman being alone and being happy that she's divorced and has left the man, something like that. But there was also this moment where she speaks about how women during the time that she was very young, in her 20s and 30s, back in the 70s, how women had more freedom. What I kind of took away from this interview was that the author seems to, at least on some issues, she seems to have quite a rigid and narrow view. Because I would argue for many women around the world, they weren't particularly more free 50, 60 years ago than now. But regardless, that is not going to deter me from reading this book. I'm still interested in giving it a go. 2 weeks ago, I did go on TikTok and discussed the synopsis, and that's when a Swedish person, I believe a Swedish person, recommended me this book, Kallocain. So these two are completely different. This one is a science fiction book. It's a dystopian science fiction novel. It was published back in 1940. I actually did some research into Boye before I started reading Kallocain. There are currently 3 English translations of her work available. All of her poems were translated about 30 years ago. Crisis, which is another novel of hers, was released a couple of years ago, and then you have this one, Kallocain, which came out also a couple of years ago. She was born in Sweden in 1900 and she passed away in 1941, shortly after Kallocain was published. She actually took her own life. It seemed like she had quite a turbulent life and was plagued with some mental health issues. I believe she also underwent some psychoelectrotherapy, the type of therapy with the electric shocks. But yes, I didn't do all that much research into her, but will do once I have finished the book. Did I say that I was halfway through? I'm halfway through at this point, so I will like to give my thoughts about what I think about the book so far. I am enjoying this quite a bit. It has been quite a while since I've read science fiction. I think the last thing that I read was from, I believe his name is Jeff Vandermeer. He's the one who wrote Annihilation, and then he had this other book with this cool cover from, I believe it was DMC, those publishers, DMX. I'm not too sure, but it had these astronauts and it looked very psychedelic, and I enjoyed that book, and I enjoyed Annihilation, and I enjoyed the movie Annihilation when it came out. I should read more of his work. I believe he did have a YA novel that came out a couple of years ago, and it seemed quite interesting. I should have a look at that. But yes, this is a dystopian novel, and it centers around this man. His name is Leo Kahl, and he is living in a totalitarian regime. This regime is wild. They all live underground at this point, so this is post our civilization. There's this new regime. It's called the Wereldstaat, the world state, although I don't believe that they have conquered the entire world, but it seems like that is their mission. And it's just a regime where there is constant surveillance, self-surveillance. Basically nothing is private, and the concept of the individual is completely squashed, and everything is about the collective. What can you do as your tiny self in order to push forward the efforts of this world state? So very early on we learn that Kahl is a chemist. Oh, I do want to mention that I am translating all these terms from Dutch to English, so it might not be the exact terms that were used in the English translation because I don't own that one. But yes, so Kahl, he is or was or is a chemist. He's from Chemist Town or Chemistry Town. Chemist? He's from Chemistry Town number 4. And so this is also an interesting thing. You have all these different towns that have their own purpose, and they all work, well, they don't work, they all provide one single thing, but communication between all of them is cut off. It's extremely limited. So essentially, if you grow up in Chemist Town, that's most likely where you're going to be staying for the rest of your life. So that's where Leo Kahl is from, and you'll quickly learn that Kahl is not the nicest person, or at least he is not necessarily the most likable person. It's very funny with this novel because he lives in this society, right, where it's all about doing whatever you can in order to improve the world state. And he is a massive social climber. So basically for him, the most important thing is just to get higher and higher within society. The only thing he's looking for is praise. That's kind of the most important thing for him its status. And so what he does is he discovers a serum, and naturally he wants to call it kallocain because his name is Kal. And what this serum does is that once it's injected into a person, that person goes into a state where they're kind of in a trance, and they will tell you the truth. They can't lie in that state. So essentially he has discovered a truth serum. And the way it works is that after the dose wears off, that person is still aware of what they've done, which is quite horrifying. And where I'm at this moment within the novel is that the head commissioner of the police has seen how the serum works, and now he and the guy above him who has been helping with the tests to they used humans obviously to experiment on the guy who was helping him with that. Both of them are now being transported to some type of police palace. That's what it's called. I don't know anything more than that. And this is it's a good book, but it's I wouldn't say it's cringe, but it almost feels like the story of Icarus. This guy Carl is flying so high, and he has no idea how close he is to the sun at this point, because okay, so this is one way in which they were experimenting on people. Okay, so for one, okay, I just want to mention this other entirely bonkers concept. You have these people who are part of the voluntary sacrifice organization, let's call it that, vrijwillige offerdienst. And what this entails is that these are people who have voluntarily signed up to become test subjects. So scientists will then do tests on them, and they just constantly have to go in and in and in and in. And so they are developing diseases, they are breaking bones, their health just completely plummets. And so they get used for this project, this truth serum. And so the first person that comes in is this guy, and they give him the truth serum. And before that, he is very proud. He's proud to be part of this organization because they're helping the efforts of the state. And then when he gets injected with the serum, he then tells Carl and his supervisor that he's extremely scared and that he hates everything. And it was just so interesting because who would sign up for something like that? But of course they have a bureau of propaganda where they kind of glorify this position as something that's very noble and good to do. And so people are initially bright-eyed about this idea of serving their country, and then eventually they realize that they have just been lured into a trap where they are sacrificing their health and just completely destroying themselves in the worst way possible, because they are essentially just declining slowly with all different types of diseases. It's very grim. But then it's interesting to see how after the serum loses its effects, that he's like, oh no, I didn't mean that. That was not what I meant. You know, that there's now this fear instilled that he can't express his own ideas, his own feelings, because there's a surveillance state, and if you are out of line, then you're done for, essentially. And also the idea of marriage was incredibly interesting to me as well, because everyone within the society is seen as a soldier, not as a human being. You are a soldier and your sole purpose is serving. And so one of the most honorable things that you can do as a soldier is create more soldiers. So if you are in a relationship and you get married to someone and that person can't have children, the best thing to do is to separate, find someone else and have children with them. And so that's what Leo Carl did. I think during the story he is with his second wife and they have 3 children. And also with these children, what happens is up until their 8th birthday, they get to go to school. School is where they learn tactical strategies, war plans, not war plans, but war strategies, things like that is what they learn at school. And then once they're 8, they get sent out to the youth camps where they get trained into becoming a soldier. So you can see this full indoctrination. And essentially, if all of your kids are out of the house, it's fine to separate and maybe find a new wife, something like that. But the interesting thing about these marriages is that there is no privacy. There are cameras and microphones in the parent room, and there is always a help, or for the most part there's a help. There's a help that will pick up your children and who will cook food for you and who will eat with you. And then at the end of the week, this help then reports everything that has happened. So if you were a good soldier or not, or anything that is out of line, they have to report. And on top of that, every adult, aside from their regular job that they have, they also have police and military shifts. So not only are you constantly being surveilled, you yourself also have to surveil other people. And so there's really no space for anyone to express themselves truly, even to their own partner, because if you do, for one, you're almost never alone, and 2, there's a big chance that if you tell your partner something in confidence, they will rat you out. And so the only amount of private life that you have as a citizen, my book almost fell. The only amount of privacy that you have is your thoughts and your ideas. And Cal is eradicating that tiny amount of privacy. And the thing is that he doesn't even think about these consequences in, how would I say this? He doesn't think his ideas through. He's so blinded by the prospect of having kallocain used for the government and that helping the world state that he doesn't realize what a big mistake he's making with this this invention. And I mean, at the start of the story, this book is written from the perspective of Cal, and he's writing it from his prison cell. So apparently something went wrong for him to end up there. But you can see that his supervisor is kind of aware of this. And even from the world states' perspective, his supervisor wonders if this is even helpful, because, I mean, obviously it's a totalitarian regime. If they don't like what someone is saying, they can just lock them up, right? They say, okay, you were here at so-and-so time and you did this, so we're sentencing you to death. But now with kallocain, they can't lie in that direct form anymore. In any case, I just wanted to mention this one thing that Cal mentions in the book with regards to kallocain, and that's when his supervisor mentions that now the entirety of private life is going to be eradicated. Carl says that there's actually no private life at all, because all of the thoughts that you have, they get converted into words and deeds, and those are in the public, and those quote unquote belong to the collective. And so because those deeds and words come from your mind, it's actually something that shouldn't be private. Now that's grim. That's really grim. One thing that I find to be so ironic and funny is how contradictory Cal is, because he is always talking about how everything should be for the collective, how the collective is important, how we should all be working towards the efforts of the world state, etc., etc. But he is doing that with the intent of receiving praise, of gaining status. He has a very selfish deposition to him, which doesn't match this whole thing about, doing things for the collectives. He's doing things for himself. And it's funny because he is constantly judging all these people who have undergone all of this experimentation, and he looks down on them, and he is disgusted by them, and he's disgusted exactly by the things with which he struggles with himself. For instance, having sympathy for someone. There was this one speech that he had to give during a party where children were sent off to another town, which essentially meant that the parents would never see them, because underneath all of this serum talk, this discovery, there's also this story where we are constantly getting hints about how things are not going well within the world state. For instance, there's a lack of women in one section of the place, of the country, and the quality of the food is getting worse. There are more military and police shifts to do, I believe, as well. So he gives a speech and he kind of shows sympathy or admiration for the people, the parents who have held their head high whilst their children leave and they never get to see them again, because he is also a parent, right? And he is already not happy with the fact that his two younger children, who are under the age of 8, are going to have to go to the youth camps at some point, and he will only be able to see them maybe once or twice a week. And he gives a speech with that improv at the end, saying that he admires these people. And someone reported him because if you're thinking from the world state perspective, is you are not supposed to have any feelings for your children whatsoever. If they are going to some other town and you never see them again, so be it. If it's better for the world state, you should be happy and you shouldn't be sad whatsoever. And so he has to give a public apology, exactly stating what he did wrong, why it was wrong, and that he won't do it anymore. And it's so it's so I'm kind of veering off into all these different aspects of the novel, but it's just so interesting. And it has only been 116 pages. It's, I don't know, maybe I do really enjoy dystopian science fiction. I think I do. I don't really remember any that I have disliked in the past. So maybe I should give that a bit more of a go. If there are any recommendations, I would love to hear them. I'm definitely going to look at Jeff Vandermeer's, his work, like I said previously, and hopefully I'll be able to finish this book in a couple of days. It sounds very exciting. There are actually a couple of dystopian books around this time that I would like to read. There's this one by a Russian author called We. I might go and get that. And of course, there is George Orwell's 1984. I never read that one. Also didn't read Animal Farm. Those are two books that are on my list to read. I did watch an animation of Animal Farm very, very long ago during history class, so I do know what it's all about. But yeah, so there is Orwell's work that I would like to read. Also, Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I'm not too sure if that's the author. He also had another book called Island, which is kind of the opposite of Brave New World. Don't quote me on this. I read this. I did some research about this 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then there was another book that seemed interesting. I think it was called We. Did I mention that one already? I did write it down for the last video that I made, I think. Oh yeah, there's another one called Darkness at Noon. We, and then also, of course, Fahrenheit 451. But those are all books that I would like to give a go at some point in the future. I don't have any concrete plans because I have so many other books that I would like to try out. I went to my mother a couple of months ago and I picked up some of the books that I had laying there. Some of the books that I read partially, some of the books that I never read. And I just want to get through them. I am trying my best to have a healthy balance between new books and library books and books that I already own. So if there is a book that I feel like, oh, I would really like to try out, or really would like to read, the first thing I'll do is I'll go to my library and see if they have it there. And then if not, I will set it aside and then think about it for a while if it's really something that I would like to have. And if not, then that goes to the wayside, and maybe at some point my library will have it. But yeah, I did go to my library this week. Hold on, wait a second. This is a quick interruption to say that if you do enjoy the content that I make on this channel and you would like to support me, you can do so by joining my Patreon. Every single month I'll upload an exclusive video, and the next one will be about Wilhelm's Room by Tove Ditlevsen. You can also get me a cup of tea or some cookies via my coffee page. The link to both of those pages are in the description box below. Okay, back to the video. Yeah, I did go to my library this week. And I made one reservation for this book right here, Janet McCurdy's I'm Happy My Mum Died. I picked this up because her latest book, her debut novel, Half Her Age, came out a couple of days ago, and it seemed very interesting. I wanted to give it a go, and I've heard so many good things about this book. I've watched a lot of McCurdy's interviews, and also recently, I think it was on the Call Her Daddy podcast, there was a snippet online where she talks about what her latest novel is based on, and it's really grim, but I would like to actually read it. But before I did so, I thought, before I even consider getting the book, I would have to read her memoir first. So that's kind of the deal that I made with myself. And then I also picked up Yuko Tsushima's Een vrouw rent over een berg. The English translation is, I believe, woman runs into the mountains. If it's not correct, there'll be a translation here. I spoke about this on my TikTok, and I spoke about this book previously, or this author Yuko Tsushima. I want more people to know about this woman. I believe she passed away in 2016. Yeah, 2016. And she was born in 1947. She is a celebrated writer within Japanese literature, but it seems that not that many people know her outside of Japan, and they should. Her father was actually Osamu Dazai, who many people know from No Longer Human and The Setting Sun, which I have reviewed on my channel as well a really long time ago. Those were really good books and I enjoyed them a lot. And because of my Japanese studies, I also got to read a couple of Dazai's short stories in Japanese. I had to do some research into his life as well. And that's how I discovered that he actually had a daughter that became an author. Actually, two of his daughters became authors. The subject matter that Tsushima talks about is so incredibly interesting and so unique within the literary space, especially in the time in which she was writing, because it centers around women who are on the fringe of Japanese society. So single women, women who have been abandoned by their husbands or partners, stories like that, because she herself was a single mother. And her mother, of course, was married to Osamu Dazai. And if you know a bit about his life, essentially what happened is I think this was his second wife, because his first wife, he was married to her and then he went into a psychiatric facility, and then he came back, found out that his wife had cheated on him with one of his friends, and so Dazai and his wife decided to end their lives. However, it didn't work out, and so they divorced, and then he married a new wife, and then that wife, he then had a mistress, and then when he was married to that wife, which was Tsushima's mother, what did he do? He took up a mistress, and I believe that it's her diary that The Setting Sun is based upon. In any case, he impregnated her and his wife at the same time. And then he dipped out of both of those relationships and then found someone else, and then those two ended their lives in 1947 or 48. So right after Tsushima and the other daughter were born. So as you can imagine, such a family history is incredibly hard to process. And so a lot of her stories center around, I guess you could say, the aftermath of being abandoned, what it means to be abandoned as a woman with children or a child within Japanese society. And I believe another of Tsushima's work is being translated at this moment, or is coming. No, it has come out already by, I believe, New Directions, or another publisher published the latest translation, but it's being published by Penguin, I believe, in a couple of months. But you can already pick that one up. And I have, I think, all of her translations in English. Oh my god, my floor is absolutely covered in books at this moment, so I can't find one of them. But okay, so I have two in my bookcase, but then I have this one right here from New Directions. This is The Shooting Gallery and Other Stories, and this was translated from the Japanese to the English by Geraldine Harcourt, who unfortunately passed away right after having translated this book to the English. So this is a short story collection that came out a really long time ago in 1997, and I believe about 1.5 years ago I read the first story in this collection. And from what I remember, in this case it was about a family. So you had the father, who was quite old, and you had two sisters, and one of the sisters seemed to be a bit of a troublemaker, so to speak. She at one point becomes pregnant, and what ends up happening is that her sister takes on the responsibility of taking care of this child, and the mother disappears, then reappears, then disappears, then reappears, and then she disappears completely. And so from the perspective of this little child, this young boy, we get to see how this woman is struggling with the responsibility of having to take care of both her sister's son and her own father, who is really getting up there in age, and how that has impacted her own life. And the resentment that she has is really palpable. Definitely worth reading that story again, and the rest of these eventually. Okay, is there anything else that I wanted to talk about? Because like I said, I have been going through my books now that I've been reading a bit more, and I've just been digging up things that I kind of started and then stopped. Yes, this one right here, this is Of Dogs and Wolves. It's 2 short stories. I spoke about this in that video that is now private. But I believe that The Watery Realm is the second story, and that story heavily references the death of her father. Okay, so I have here a couple of books that I got right before everything went downhill. So this was very much so me just not knowing what to do in life. I was just thinking, oh gosh, what is even the meaning of life at this point? And I went looking for books, and I found Jean-Paul Sartre, his book Nausea. Don't know exactly what it is about, but it did get mentioned in representations of the intellectual, and how Sartre's work was, I don't know if that was mentioned in Said's book, but I do remember that Sartre was inspired by Frantz Fanon. And I have his book right here. This is The Wretched of the Earth, and there's another Penguin classic of Fanon, which is called Black Skin, White Skin, I believe. Yeah, so these are all the non-fiction books that I had. Well, not all of them. These are some of the non-fiction books that I had purchased during that very difficult time. And I also got The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, and another book. So I think I will be reading these soon, after having finished representations of the intellectual. Lastly, I wanted to mention The Right to Sex by Amir Shrinivasan. It came in finally. I had promised a couple of people that I would be reading this because they were very interested in hearing my thoughts after I had mentioned my interest in the book. So it consists of six essays. So I think I will be doing or reading this in the same way as Said's his essay collection. I will just be writing things down and trying to how would I say this, reconstruct the essay in my mind, basically just writing a summary just so that I get a good understanding of what is being said. But I read more reviews of this, not full on reviews, but just a couple of one-liners, and so many people have so many good things to say about this book, so I'm sure that I will have a lot to talk about in the next episode. I feel like this is getting really, really long. So lastly, I just want to mention the movies that I watched. So I watched Rental Family, that was directed by Hikari. And I'm going to be talking about that one. I also watched A Winter in Chokcho a couple of days ago as well. But I had mentioned watching Rental Family previously, so I'll just only go over that for now. So Rental Family, this is a story about an American who is living in Japan. He has been for over 7 years at this point, and he had huge success at the start of his career there as an actor. He was the mascot, I believe, for a toothpaste, and that did very, very well, the commercials. So now fast forward 7 years later, and he's having difficulties finding a job, and we meet him when he is going for an audition for, I believe, a detective show. And afterwards, his agent calls him for a gig where he had to act like someone who was mourning a loss. So he had to go to a funeral. And when he's at the funeral, he realizes that it's a funeral for an alive person, and that this person had arranged his own funeral, which is a bit puzzling. Afterwards, he meets up with the person who hires him, and that person asks him to join his company. And the whole stick behind the company is that people can hire them to act out particular roles within their life. So they can act like a girlfriend or a best friend, and they can go gaming. They can act like a father or a husband or something like that. Just things like that. Basically, they are renting people. If you are into manga, you might know Rent a Girlfriend. It's something like that, but then for all sorts of people. So eventually he decides to take on one gig, and he has to essentially act like he is marrying this one Japanese lady, and he almost chickens out and he almost ruins the entire wedding. But in the end, he gets convinced by the other people who are working at the company to come out and quote unquote marry her. And so her parents are very pleased. I'm pretty sure they're not in on this scheme. But then after the wedding, the guy and the lady are in their bridal suite, and that's when someone knocks, and it turns out that it's the female lover of this woman. And now that she is quote unquote married, she can finally start her actual life with her partner. And so that's kind of how the movie starts, and it starts very hopeful with this idea of we're here to help out people. And that's kind of how the story is marketed. The story is marketed as a comedy drama movie, but I myself felt that it was actually incredibly dystopian and disheartening, because what happens is that this guy starts taking on more and more and more gigs, and what happens is that you actually get to see the dark side of having to hire someone. Even just that idea of hiring someone to act out a social function feels very dystopian, because it's just an indicator of how within modern society connections are breaking apart. Human connections are so much harder to gain. There's really a breakdown of community and more people are lonely. And so now you have these companies pop up who are telling you, hey, you're lonely, we can fix that for you. You can pay us, and then in return, we will give you manufactured interest. And also within the movie, this type of work gets compared to sex work because the guy also himself goes to a sex worker, and she basically says, I'm doing the same thing that you're doing, but I am doing the physical part and you're doing the mental part. So yes, that's kind of what the movie is about. And then you have two major cases, so to speak. The first one is a Japanese woman who had a relationship with an American, I believe, and she had a child, but that man is no longer in her life, and she is having difficulties getting her child into a good school. And so what she decides to do is hire this American to play the girl's dad. But in order to make it feel really real, they tell this girl that this is her actual father. And so so this guy gets encouraged to get close to this girl for a number of weeks. And so you can see that this girl is so desperate for a father, and that she finds it in this guy, thinking that it's her actual father. And then once she actually gets close to this guy, the mom is not happy because she feels like the guy is overstepping a boundary. Ugh, gosh. And eventually, once this girl gets accepted, the mom tells him that he has to tell this girl, okay, I'm going back to America. I promised that I was gonna stay, but I'm gonna leave. See ya. Deuces. And honestly, that is so crazy to me. That feels so incredibly dystopian. Just the amount of trauma that this girl goes through in this movie gets completely glossed over. And so eventually he tells the girl, okay, I'm leaving, bye. And then she figures out that he's actually an actor and everything is fake. And then at the end, you know, they reconcile and everything is good again. And it's like, no, that is, can we talk about how her mom was emotionally abusive? Because that is crazy work to do to your kid. So there's another case as well with an old guy, but it's essentially the same thing. He gets hired by another person to deceive another person. So I won't get in. So basically you have the old man, and he was an actor and now he's kind of forgotten, and his daughter is a bit worried because he feels sad that he is being forgotten. And so she tells this American to act like he is a reporter and to come to their house and then write down his life story. And then it kind of escalates again. And then the daughter sees that it's escalating and she's like, no, you have to stop this now. And it's so... Can we just talk about how these people are just hiring social interactions, and then when things go south, they're just like, okay, just stop it. I don't care about the effect that is going to have on the person that I was deceiving. It's wild to me. So I don't know, I thought it was interesting because I did not interpret that movie at all as a comedy drama. I would call it dystopian. But yes, so aside from that, I also watched A Winter in Chokcho, and I think I will talk about that in another video because this one is starting to become really, really long. In any case, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon in another video. Bye bye!